October 2022, and I've headed for shores of Lake Geneva to the home of the modern Olympics, Lausanne. Stretching up the hills from Lake Geneva, Lausanne is the fourth largest city in Switzerland and a centre for international sport, being home to both the International Olympic Committee and the Court for Arbitration for Sport. The history of the city actually starts a little to the west of the modern city centre in the Roman settlement of Lausanne, a military camp built at the site of an earlier Celtic settlement on the banks of Lake Geneva, at a time when the waters of the lake lapped at the harbours of the camp. At a privileged strategic location, controlling both the lake and road traffic and the trade of goods between the Rhone and the Rhine, the settlement's prosperity was ensured. By 400, the settlement was called Civitas Lausanne, but within 100 years, the settlement would be abandoned as the Roman Empire crumbled and the citizens migrated to the top of the hills, which were easier to fortify, and from there, the modern site of the city of Lausanne grew. Whilst the location of a Roman settlement had been known about since at least the 15th century, the first excavations uncovering a house on the site of the current Roman Museum weren't carried out until the 1930s. It wasn't until works were undertaken on the construction of the A1 motorway in the 1960s that the full extent of the port and military camp were uncovered. Today, low walls showing the positioning of the forum, basilica, temple and port give an idea to the scale of the settlement. A shallow lake marks the point where the banks of the lake used to be, and on display in the centre are some of the original wooden posts sunken into the soil and preserved for millennia of the harbour piers. Underneath the A1 motorway itself, protected from the elements, is a mosaic that was one of the first elements for fort to be discovered. And a short distance away, the Roman Museum, on the site of the originally uncovered house, tells the story of the settlement in artefacts and the excavation, as well as interpretations of what life might have been like. Halfway back to the city centre from the Roman camp is the location of the city's botanical gardens. There's been a botanical garden in the city since the late 19th century, but the current location only opened in 1946, when the existing collections were relocated into the freshly landscaped park. The rock garden, which makes up the main features of the gardens, being carefully extracted from the Jura Mountains and merged into the terrain of the original hillside to make it look like it'd always been there. Today, the garden contains over 6,000 plants, both local to the region and the alpine climates of this part of Switzerland, as well as species from around the world. In the centre of Lausanne itself is the Place de la Riponne and the monumental Palais de Rumine, home to a collection of some of Lausanne's best museums. On his death in 1871, Gabriel de Rumine left the city 1.5 million Swiss francs, nearly 30 million francs today, in his will to erect a building for public use. Building work began in 1892 and the Palais de Rumine was inaugurated in November 1902, with the University of Lausanne moving into the building in 1904. In 1923, the building was the location for the signing of the Treaty of Lausanne that, amongst other articles, finally settled the borders of modern-day Turkey, Greece and Bulgaria following the final collapse of the Ottoman Empire at the end of World War I. During the 1980s, the university moved out into a new campus due to lack of space, and the building was restructured to house a number of different museums, as well as still housing a branch of the university's library service. The Musée cantonal d'archéologie et d'histoire, or Cantonal Museum of Archaeology and History, occupies one wing on the middle floor of the building and charts the history of a region from the earliest settlements of humans in hillside caves and small shelters through to the later Middle Ages. Located off of the elaborate central hall that sits at the top of a grand staircase, you can also find a branch of the university's library, as well as the Musée cantonal des Beaux-Arts, the Cantonal Museum of Fine Arts. Up another floor and split across the floor in two wings is the Musée cantonal de géologie. You can probably work that one out for yourselves. On one side of the stairs, the gallery looks at prehistoric creatures, including dinosaurs, with the skull of a T-Rex being a major highlight. On the opposite side of the stairs is the collection of rocks, minerals and gems, which cover both the geology of the Vaud region and Switzerland more widely, as well as examples of fluorescent minerals and rocks and other valuable stones from around the world. Ascending to the top floor takes you to the Musée cantonal de zoologie, which harks back to a different era with glass cabinets filled with taxidermised animals from around the world. Along with housing a number of museums, the Palais also acts as a convenient way of climbing up the hill that the heart of Lausanne is located on, as you can exit from the top floor of the museum and walk a short distance round to the Musée Historique Lausanne. Housed in the former Bishop's Palace, the museum tells the history of the city itself, starting from the Romans and running through to the modern day as a city of technology and learning. Did you know the Nespresso machine was invented in Lausanne? The highlight of the museum is a model of Lausanne as it would have looked in the late 1630s, that is used for a regular audio-visual presentation on the history of the city. Whilst the city wall may have long gone and many of the buildings have been replaced with more modern structures, you can still make out the distinctive valleys of a long since buried River Flon that are visible today from the soaring bridges that cross them, as well as the cathedral, Bishop's Palace and Castle complex on the highest hill that are unchanged to today. The museum continues through the rooms of the historic Bishop's Palace, with original painted walls and the small rooms on view. Opposite the museum is the Cathedral of Notre Dame of Lausanne, the city's 12th century Gothic cathedral that stands as a landmark at one of the highest points in the city. Originally constructed between 1170 and 1235, the cathedral became a Protestant cathedral following the Reformation, and the highly ornate decorations inside the building were covered over. During the 18th and 19th century, restorations were carried out by the man who helped save Carcassonne, Eugène Viollet-le-Duc. Further restoration work to return the building to how it had looked in the 13th century were carried out in the 20th century. A short walk north of the cathedral, and at the northern ridge the hill they sit on, is the Château St-Maire, a 15th century castle that is now the seat of the cantonal government for Vaud. Next time, I journey from Lausanne along the banks of Lake Geneva to the most visited historic monument in Switzerland, attracting tourists including Victor Hugo, Alexandre Dumas, Mary Shelley and Lord Byron since the 18th century, the lakeside, Château Chillon. And I head into the hills above for views from the town of Glion.